folks. Here on the right, we are known as the right wing. We're horrible people, and we want blacks to go back to Africa, and anyone who's poor needs to be punished. We only care about the unborn. Everyone else can die, and we don't believe in dinosaurs, and we think the Earth is 300 years old. That is the view of the right wing. In fact, I've noticed with liberals, they just say, yeah, he's really right wing, and that's just, we're done now with that guy. We may be guilty of that too over on our side of the fence, but I thought just for fun, let's break down the groups here on the right and show how disparate and fractured they are. I mean, the fact that Cruz hates Trump and Trump hates Cruz shows that we are by no means unified, and I wish we were more unified. As far as I'm concerned, there's only two types of people in the world when it comes to politics. There's people who want to be left alone and people who won't leave them the fuck alone. Let's start at the very extreme far right. They call themselves the alt-right. They are seen as white supremacists. I think they're Western chauvinists, and they recognize that white people seem to be doing a great job with the West, and we should at least revere them. There are non-whites on this side of the fence, but there's also a lot of assholes. They are obsessed with the term cuck-servative, which could have had a fun day in court if it didn't attack race mixers like me. You have to be pretty pure to be on the alt-right. But when I think of the big names on the alt-right, whom I know, none of them have given me any shit for marrying an Indian or making Indians or hanging out with homos or any of that stuff. So their followers can tend to get on your nerves, but the actual guys, pretty good guys. Those are Richard Spencer, who I believe coined the term alt-right, John Derbyshire, who was fired from National Review because he wrote an article at tachymag.com that mimicked the letter, which is a letter you write to your black son telling him how horrible the world is and how racist everyone is. Jared Taylor, who grew up in Japan and pronounces the word white. And Colin Flaherty, who documents black crime fastidiously, and then Peter Brimelow, who is sort of the go-to authority on immigration. He wrote the book Alienation, and you really can't talk about immigration without talking to Peter Brimelow. He's the top, and I'd much rather see a fight within the right about immigration with, say, the neocons versus someone like Brimelow than I would with the left and the right, because the left haven't done their homework. So a battle of the right is a battle of the wits. A battle with right and left is more like sort of a teaching session where you have to tell them what the data is. All right. After that, we have the paleocons, also known as very pure, and that term is relatively old, paleocon. It sort of goes back to pre-2000, and it was about the pure conservatives. The only ones that come to mind as far as big names go are Pat Buchanan, whose brilliant book, Death of the West, changed my life, and Michelle Malkin, another conservative purist. I guess Cruz would be one, but I mention him later on. The paleocons are isolationist. They hate the neocons, who we'll get to later. Neocons, all right, you know what? Let's get to neocons now. Neocons are really transmogrified liberals who were very left, and then realized that the left doesn't support Israel and doesn't want any intervention in the Middle East. So then they went, oh, no, now we're Republicans. And that's another sort of old term. That was George W. Bush was one, John Bolton is one, Paul Wolfowitz is one. And these guys are very pro-Israel Republicans. I like those guys too a lot, especially John Bolton. Ambassador John Bolton. It feels blasphemous to call him John Bolton. But John Bolton and Pat Buchanan would get in a fist fight. If they would be like those Siamese fighting fish. You couldn't separate the partition, or they would be at each other's throats. There's the black conservatives. I've split those into two groups. The black conservatives include Thomas Sowell, the smartest guy in America. I mean, I've never heard Thomas Sowell say anything that was not completely brilliant. Jason Riley, who wrote the great book, Please Stop Helping Us. He's the husband of Naomi Schaefer Riley, who's a wonderful gift to literature. And Alan West, the guy who didn't coin the phrase, but rammed war is hell down our throats after those soldiers were caught pissing on the Taliban. Because, yeah, it's okay to piss on people who are trying to blow you up. We're too bourgeois about this stuff. Now I have a separate category, black cons poor. I've called them ghetto in the past, and I don't think Sonny Johnson appreciates that. But Sonny Johnson and Talib Starks are coming at the right and a hatred of government from the hood. They've seen what it does to people. They've seen what welfare does to black lives. And they truly believe Black Lives Matter because they don't want them encumbered by the teat of the nanny state. Another category here, outcasts. All right, these are the freaks, and I guess being an old punk rocker, I feel a real allegiance to freaks. I find myself consistently drawn to weirdos. In fact, the founder of the anarcho-punk band Crass, Penny Rimbaud, said that he met most of the people he knew because weirdos tend to congregate. The outcasts include Charles C. Johnson, who runs Got News. He also does WeSearch, I think it's called. And he was kicked off Twitter for saying, let's take down that dude in the Patagonia vest, because it was implied it was an assassination attempt. Pax Dickinson, who works with Charles, he was kicked off at social media for saying that Mel Gibson was going to be raped by a pack of niggers. Now, he said that because he was paraphrasing what Mel Gibson himself said. But because we go back now over time and take things out of context, that was seen as offensive as what you thought it was when I first said it. Mike Cernovich is another brilliant outcast who is empowering young men with his book Guerrilla Mindset to be independent and free of the left's dogma. Joe Rogan I'd put in the outcast. He's pretty left-wing on a lot of stuff, but at least he's curious. And if there's one thing I've noticed from the right, and it's one thing I hope you guys notice from how scattered it all is, that at least the right is willing to hear other opinions. Again, neocons and paleocons, arch enemies. With the left, they all seem totally unified. You go to an anti-immigration rally, and there's a Free Mumia placard on someone's sign. They're all on the same page, and it basically just means, I hate white guys, which really just means, I hate my dad. The right doesn't have a problem with his dad, and it could actually do with some thumbs up on old dad. Alex Jones is another outcast. Alex Jones from InfoWars. And you'll never see braver journalists than on InfoWars. They go into the fray and almost get the crap kicked out of them because they're willing to ask questions that no one else will ask. Sam Hyde is another weirdo freak who no one knows where he stands in the political spectrum because he's so brave, but he'll go in there and bring performance art and comedy to the right and really antagonize people, including doing a TED Talk as an ex-Somalian documentary filmmaker who was entrenched in the warlords down there, all completely made up to mock social justice warriors. And of course, the leader of the outcasts has got to be Jim Goad. Like, no one is more conclusive than Jim Goad. I've offered people $100 if they can find anything he's ever said wrong, and his book, The Redneck Manifesto, is a gift from the Lord. All right, now here's another category. Broadcast patriots. These people, I don't know why I want to put them in a separate group. They have incredible strength. They have an incredible following, but they almost seem like the outcasts in their own sort of a satellite. I can't explain why. A lot of this is not a science. It's a vibe, man, and you may have to smoke pot to follow the rest of this video. So broadcast patriots, of course, that includes a lot of SiriusXM Patriot and a lot of Fox News and Breitbart and all this stuff. Daily Caller, but I've got Mark Levin, David Webb, Andrew Wilkow. All of their shows on SiriusXM are fascinating and unique. Andrew is the libertarian of the group. We also have Joe Walsh doing talk radio. Sean Hannity is not only just at Fox News, but he has his own radio show. And it's funny because when you look at the left and you look at The Daily Show, you have the guy doing the interview and his producer both sharing stacks of papers that they've done their research with. And then they have all the other people who have done all this pre-research. Same with the hosts of these left-wing shows. Like Colbert, everyone has had just this team of writers working their ass off on his sarcastic, smug point. But then you have other guys, broadcast patriots such as Rush Limbaugh, where they just go off for hours and hours at a time with no script, no researchers, no slaves doing their dirty work, just figuring out as they go along because they have the tenacity, the intellect, and the heart to really know what the hell they're talking about. I include Tucker Carlson in that group of broadcast patriots, and of course Greg Gutfeld and Tom Shalhoub over at Red Eye. Now here's another group. I have this title somewhat sarcastically, is the Islamophobes. And you have, again, I'm sorry, like Ann Coulter said, our blacks are better than their blacks. Our rights are better than their lefts. I don't know why this is. Maybe it's because we get hammered outside of Fox News and talk radio, but we always have to know 100% of our facts or we get grilled. They can get away with murder. I mean, they can literally get away with murder. Hillary Clinton gets away with murder. The Islamophobes, you talk to Robert Spencer, for example, about the Quran. It's like he has the entire thing memorized. Pamela Geller is another woman, incredibly, not that Robert Spencer's a woman, another person who knows the Quran inside and out, knows the Muslim problem. And this isn't, though they're both portrayed as rednecks, I guess Robert is portrayed as some nut Zionist who's all about Israel and the Jews have to take over the world. But you talk to these people and you go, Jesus, you have really done your homework. Another perfect example of this is Ezra Levant, who, like Robert, is lumped in to the nut bar Israeli Zionist Jew blah 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 thing, but I've seen Ezra passionately defend Muslims with the same fervor he defends Jews. His priority is freedom of speech, not necessarily what is being said. Mark Steyn is another guy. I can only read his books in small doses because the truth hammer you keep getting nailed in the head with can be overwhelming. Britain, by the way, does very well with the Islamophobes, with Tommy Robinson, the English Defence League, and Nigel Farage, and UKIP, and Liberty GB. All those groups are, but I left them out of this because that seems like another kettle of fish here. We're focusing on North America. Now we have National Review, who may speak like Jared Taylor, metaphorically, but they are sort of the monocle-wearing elites of the right, and they hate Trump with a passion. They hate a lot of the righties I'm talking about. And I, though politically split from them, very often absolutely adore them. I truly adore them. Although I'm pissed about firing John Derbyshire. And I went to a free speech event with some National Review guys, and the hypocrisy of them being in the room just pissed me off. So that is always going to stick in my craw. But I still, when I read Kevin Williamson, for example, or Jonah Goldberg, or Charles C. Cook, I'm consistently blown away by how hard they've done their work and the profundity of their writing. All right, I'm running out of steam here. New category, the cruise cons, I call them, the cruise conservatives. They tend to be more Christian. They tend to be more traditional. They're very constitutionalist. They hate inconsistency. And they are Steven Crowder, another guy. Again, I mean, just do a Jeopardy game with any of these guys, and you will be blown away with how smart they are. Glenn Beck. The guy gets very passionate about religion. A lot of people on the right see him as a Looney Tune, sort of like Alex Jones, but on the Christian end of the spectrum. Read his books. Read Miracles and Massacres. I mean, they are an absolute joy to read. The guy knows what he's talking about, and he has the language at his disposal. Nick Searcy, who's doing the book about the Grover, what's his name? The abortionist who killed 40,000 black babies. He's also an actor. I think he's in not Walking Dead. Anyway, he's a very successful actor, and he's a very proficient and prolific pro-life artist. Ben Shapiro, we also have a guy, split with him on the Michelle Fields thing, don't get that. Very true to his morals. Did a brilliant video about the myth of the Muslim moderate minority, majority. Dana Lash is another wonderful woman on Glenn Beck's The Blaze. Her show Dana Must Be Seen. You can get it on your Roku if you don't want to spend for the subscription. She's a real Second Amendment genius with her Get Your Hands Off My Gun. Ben Domenech over at The Federalist. The Federalist being a site that is very pro-individual states' rights. He's very anti-Trump, that guy. Wonderful guy. Katie Pavlich is another, I'd call her a cruise con, though I'm not sure that she supports him, but I know she's not a Trump fan. And Great author. She wrote Fast and Furious. Brilliant on Fox. When you see her, she's done her research. I always feel like an idiot because I only spend about an hour researching my answers. And she goes into the nuances of the IRS tax laws. And I actually thought she was a lesbian for a while because I thought she's too smart to be straight. Then I found out she grew up in the middle of nowhere. That's why a girl that pretty is that smart. Sabo, the artist Sabo, is another Cruz con. He's the guy who did the infamous Cruz poster where Cruz has a cigarette in his mouth. Putting him in that group. Then I'm jumping over to the Trump cons. I guess that's me. Matt Drudge is one of those guys, another prolific dude. And you'll notice with a lot of these Jezebel social justice warriors, or remember that guy Toure, what was his name? Toura? Those guys are a flash in the pan. You don't see them for long. Matt Drudge will be around when he's old and white. The libs tend to pack it in pretty early. Nero is another Trump con. Ann Coulter, a la Jim Goad. She's in my top 5, and I always say when people criticize her, what sentence in what book do you have a problem with? Not even wrong. Sarah Palin is another Trump con, brassy broad from Alaska that the left really hates. And when you talk to liberals about what they want to do to her, you forget that they're feminists. When you hear the disgusting things they say about her, Ann Coulter, and Michelle Malkin, those 3 people couldn't have less in common. But the fact that they're all female means they get the exact same vitriol from the left, and it's really gross, and I'm gross. Andrew Breitbart, I'm including in my list of Trump cons, and I realize he's dead. I cried like a baby when he died, but I don't really see the guy as dead. I mean, you listen to Sirius Patriot Radio and you hear Breitbart this and, well, Breitbart says, or you'll be at a meeting with someone else and they'll go, well, you heard what Breitbart said about this. The guy's fucking dead. And people quote him more than ever before. Can you imagine people saying that about Hillary? Say she doesn't win and she runs Hillary.com news and, well, have you heard what Hillary says? Never happened. No one ever said, well, you heard what Al Jazeera said. No one said, well, the Young Turks are furious about this. It didn't happen. It only happens with Breitbart. Now we have the factual feminists. I guess Nero might make a cameo in this. There's going to be some Venn diagram overlap. But with the factual feminists, I include C.H. Summers, who coined the phrase, Ash Show, who is on over in D.C. there. I've had her on my show many times, and she focuses on college stuff, which is really where the war against idiotic feminism is at its peak. I guess I should include Kat Timpf in the factual feminist, although she is kind of a broadcast patriot. No, Kat Timpf goes in factual feminist because she's fighting the college kids. We have Sargon of Akkad, another brilliant anti-feminist who just breaks it down point by point. It's funny that you get so much spitting in faces from the left, and you get die-cis scum, and Sarah Palin needs to be disemboweled, and then from these factual feminists like Sargon, who, I'm not for anonymity, he often uses his real name, and he actually calls himself a liberal on many issues. You just get this sort of metered out dialogue from the entire right and the factual feminist that just says, well, this is my understanding, and this is what the punishment for rape has been since the 16th century, and this is why you're wrong. Lauren Southern is another woman, a colleague of mine over at Rebel Media. And I could open up that Pandora's box with that and talk about Faith Goldy and everyone there at Rebel Media. But I've got to trim the fat somewhere. And no, ladies, I'm not saying you're fat. And then Roosh V is another factual feminist, although he'd probably murder me if he found out I called him a feminist. But at least he explains the problem with feminism in a rational way, which is getting rarer and rarer, which brings us to the free speechers. I include porn star Mercedes Carrera, who is a regular on my show and is totally devoted to free speech. And to be totally devoted to free speech, you have to include things you don't like, which you don't get from the left. They don't seem to enjoy including horrible stuff like hate speech. Sorry, kids, but free speech is about all the grossest pedophilia speech outside of threatening someone's life. It's about the most horrible racism and sexism. Even these disgusting liberals I'm talking about, I don't want them censored. I'm not like Merkel. I don't want comedians going to prison for a joke. I don't want anyone being punished for anything that you can do with this area outside of biting someone. Greg Lukianoff is also a guy who would be bummed about being on my list of right-wingers because he's a lib, but he's devoted his life via fire to free speech. And I guess I'm also ignoring Gamergate here, guys like Adam Baldwin. I don't give a shit about video games, and I'm not including that in the political spectrum. It's a hobby, okay? I'm not including board games in this either. Which brings us down to the Libertarians, a socially liberal, fiscally conservative group, smart kids, a lot of them too smart. You'll notice when you go to a Libertarian convention, you get some weird twitches, and sometimes they'll even have BO. To understand economics, you have to be a little bit robotic. You have to be a little bit autistic. Now, the ones who avoid that and are still functioning members of society with perfect smelling armpits are Kennedy on Fox Business News. By the way, speaking of fights, Kennedy versus John Bolton was one of the best fights I've ever seen broadcast. And speaking of Fox News, you got to see Hannity and Pat Buchanan go at it. Yikes. Matt Welch, the editor of Reason. I don't know, is Nick Gillespie the editor of Reason too? Both Nick and Matt are bigwigs at Reason, which is the Bible of the libertarians, and a really fascinating place to see what happens when government gets power. We know absolute power corrupts absolutely, and they are absolutely corrupting our lives with their bullshit laws. I think I've covered all the conflict here. Cruz and Trump is a perfect example of this. But the big picture here is that the right is not the big, evil corporate pig with the bald head and the cigar going, ha, 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 make the blacks suffer. I want to get more rich off slavery. It's a fractured group that, from my personal experience, genuinely cares a hell of a lot more than the left because they've looked it up and they're willing to fight for it. And fight for it they do with each other. Choose this side because we're the ones that want to leave you alone. And if you hate hassle, we're your guys.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.